Hello and welcome to this video where I'm going to explain how the commit phase works for Lilith on the version 1.3. So the commit phase is the trickiest part of the rule set to get right because you want Lilith to be committing and not being too defensive, but on the other hand you don't want her to be over committing as well so she has no defenders for the player's turn. So the rules have been revised down to 5 conditions, and one condition regarding opponent having no characters, and then another 3 conditions for if they have no combat or terror icons. So generally speaking, for most of the game you'll just be looking at condition 5, which refers to favorable trades in the combat and terror struggles. Now, in the previous rule set I tried to write an ordered sequence of events for looking at terror struggle, then the combat struggle. But the problem is that in practice the two can become interdependent. So it proved very difficult to write it out in such a way. So the rules have become more principle-based, if you will, where you have to figure out in the situation how Lilith will achieve the goal that she wants. But most of the time it's not going to be so hard. It's actually going to make for a better game because you're going to make the smart choice every time, whereas when you try to write it down as a series of ordered steps, it becomes very difficult with certain cards and conditions. So let's look at an example of how it works now, a complicated example, just to show you that it's actually viable. So Lilith has 10 characters down here and her opponent has 6. So let's start with story 1. Lilith actually has 3 terror icons. Opponent has only 1, and Lilith has 2, 4, 6, 7, 8 combat icons, but 2 of them are on Ravager from the Deep, who generally doesn't want to commit with his friends. So if you forget about him, you're talking about 2, 4, 5, 6. The opponent has 2, 4, 6, 7, 8 combat icons. So that's why you have to look at them together, because it looks like here we're going to try and win terror and trade combat, but in certain circumstances the opponent, if he has combat and terror icons on the same characters, he can actually avoid losing the insanity and still win the combat. So that's why it becomes very complicated to try and write it out. So okay, in this situation, to win the terror we would think about playing Cthulhu here, and if we did that, our opponent, he can either let us win, or if he wants to tie on terror, or rather not lose to insanity, he plays a demon lover, but then he's actually going to lose the combat struggle here. On the other hand, if he tries to play against the combat struggle, say putting in this card here, now he has an issue because he's going to lose terror and lose his character. So even if he were playing more characters like this, so now he has 6 combat. So terror struggle he loses, so one of these 3 goes off, and then he wins the combat. But in this instance, Cthulhu is invulnerable anyway, so Cthulhu is not worried about taking a wound. But if Cthulhu were not invulnerable, we could kind of play in a sacrifice character of low potential, because Laboratory Assistant is lower than any of our opponent's cards, and then Lilith in that instance would take the trade. But because Cthulhu is invulnerable, she doesn't need to, so she's gonna happily commit to this particular story. So the minimum number of characters she can commit to story 1 to get a favorable trade is 1. And now the next condition is that the character should have some skill, otherwise she'll put a character with skill to buff it up. And then next condition is characters with the arcane icon that do not have combat or terror can come in if they would help to get Cthulhu to stand up. We don't have any such characters. And the final condition is that characters who have investigation but not combat or terror can come in if they would help to win investigation. Now, in this case, our opponent has 1, 2, 3 investigation icons, so we would have to bring in, say, 4 characters. But there's a flaw in this logic because actually one of them will die in the combat phase, or could die in the combat phase, because when Cthulhu was alone, we lose combat and nobody dies, but bringing another character would kill one. So that invalidates Lilith's conditions, where she'll only bring in the investigation arcane characters provided they won't suffer insanity or take a wound. So what she's trying to do is to not bring in more terror combat icons on her turn to win other struggles, because she needs them to defend, and also not to unnecessarily sacrifice other characters to win certain other struggles. So that's it for story 1, and now we come to story 2. So in this story, again, we can tie the terror, and then we're going to lose combat, but we can actually play in a sacrifice card of potential 1, and our opponent's cards are higher potential. So if our opponent comes here, they can win combat, but, well, sorry, take it back, being foolish. Actually, we can't do that because we can't win terror. We would tie, and then we're going to lose combat. So the more interesting scenario is if this demon lover were actually exhausted. Then we could win the terror, so we'd come in, and then we would play a sacrifice here. Because our opponent, no matter who he puts in, you're going to lose a higher potential character to insanity than we do in combat. So once we did that, we would again look for the arcane characters who might come in, and then again we'd go through the investigative ones. Now, one other scenario I want to show you is if the demon lover were exhausted at the start, would we play Cthulhu or would we play Guardian Shoggoth? And you can see from the logic that if we had played Guardian Shoggoth, then we would need a sacrifice in here to make it 2 characters, whereas if we just play Cthulhu, he can manage on his own. So the minimum number of characters to play in to achieve the objective is 1. So he would still go in there, and then this one would come over here. So then back to this second scenario, we bring in the sacrifice. Now we're satisfied at story. We don't have arcane character. Well, we have skill above 0. We don't have arcane characters without combat terror icons, and we do have these 3 investigators like before, but our opponent has 3 investigations. So if he came in and traded out a different character, he would still have 3 investigation left. We would lose this assistant and have the other 3, and therefore we can't win investigation. So Lilith will stick like that. She'll then go to story 3. Can't win terror, can't win combat, therefore she's not interested. So I hope that makes it somewhat clear how Lilith works. Maybe I'll show a couple more examples, but this is a pretty complicated one, a lot of characters in play, and a vulnerable rule, but still I think it's reasonable to see what you would do. So have fun trying out Lilith 1.3, and good luck.